I'm Franz Spohn. I'm here at Nasco to discuss some basic tools and equipment that you'll need if you decide that you want to do a block print. Block printing is often referred to as relief printing because what you're doing is applying ink on the top surface of a block. It could be wood block, linoleum. I'll show you a couple of materials that you can use. And then transferring that ink from the top of that surface onto a piece of paper. So that's why it's called relief. Everybody, for the most part, has done a relief print on the first day they were born. If you think about taking a baby's hands and feet and inking them up and putting them on their birth certificate, that is your first relief print. Okay, I have a couple of different materials. This is called Speedy Cut. It is a soft rubber-like material. And this is good for younger artists because it's easier to cut. Right? This is Speedy Carve. It's pink. It will hold your lines, the images that you're cutting into. It holds a slightly sharper edge. Both of them are flexible. This one, if you bend too much, may give you some cracks. This one is pretty indestructible. And then this is linoleum, mounted linoleum. Linoleum is made out of ground up wood pulp and linseed oil. It's a renewable source, glued on the block. It's nice and steady, and so that it makes an ideal material to do your relief print with. And then wood. You could also be working with wood. Now, I'll demonstrate some of the cutting tools, but what I always do before I ever get started working on linoleum, I've got some screen printing ink here. You could use some other kind of ink. And I'm going to take a paper towel and just put a little bit of this. And I use this red color. I want kind of a medium valued color. I go ahead and I just stain the surface of the linoleum. And I'll wipe the excess off. I don't want there to be a texture because if that texture dries and I'm using acrylic ink, screen printing ink to do this with, then that may become unintentionally part of the background color or texture. Now, the reason I do this gives me an opportunity to see what I've done when I cut into the linoleum. So there's enough of a contrast between the value of this color and the natural color of the linoleum that when I make a cut, I can see where that cut is. And then if I use a black Sharpie or if I use some kind of a black ink to do the key drawing, then I will know that you don't cut out the black lines, you cut everything away from that, and as you're making your cuts, you can actually physically see what those cuts look like. All right, another handy piece of equipment to have with the system is a bench block, inking plate. All right, what's important about this, it's made with a flange here and a flange down here, so that if I put this on the table and I put the block on top of it, if I press that way or if I'm carving in that direction, then the block is not going to move. You have to be really concerned with safety when you're using sharp tools, and without a bench block, the tendency is to put your hand on the block in front here, and then as you're carving, if you slip, then your blade's going to go right into your hand, and that can be a pretty messy event. And we want this to be fun and artistic and not something that is dangerous. So if you have a bench block, as you're carving, there's no necessity to put your hand in front of the block to stabilize it. Another alternative is to get some non-slip rug pads. A lot of people will put these underneath throw rugs on hardwood floors, and when you put your block on top of that, then there's enough of a resistance that you can also use that as a quick substitute for a bench block. I put this away. We'll talk a little bit about the cutting tools. Okay, this is a safety cutter, and it's more like a draw knife. And so this is another tool that would be good for younger artists. And so demonstrate with it. I'll put it on my skid pad. And in this case, I'm going to be drawing it towards me. So I want my hand away from me. And as I'm drawing it towards me, then I'm removing the material. So if I have some kind of design worked in there, you know, I can do all sorts of movements. I've got some additional blades in the handle, and depending on which one of these you use, you can make thin lines, you can make thick lines. You know, there are 4 different blades, so you can make 4 thicknesses of lines, and you can kind of work out your design depending whether you want a thick line, thin line, and whatnot. Okay, now we'll get to our nice tinted piece of linoleum. These are interchangeable. You undo the collet, remove the blade, and I have more traditional cutting tools here, cutting blades. Okay, you tighten that up, that stays in there. All right, and they come in a variety of widths as well. You have smaller ones for very fine line work, and then this one is more or less a median one. And a lot of times the way that I hold the tool gives me a little bit more control over how to cut, and also is a lot safer. I use both hands on my tool, and it's really hard to cut yourself if you have both hands on your tool. And what I'll do is push against it, and then move forward with my hands, push again, move forwards. And if you have a sharp tool, you can see the way that that piece of linoleum is spiraling up. So that indicates that I have a nice sharp blade. If you have resistance, if you have a hard time making the cuts, then perhaps it's time to change the blade, put a new sharp one in. All right, so now having made that, because I tinted the linoleum, I can see exactly how thick that line is. Now another thing, because these are kind of a U-shaped or almost a V-shaped, if you think about the way the cutting edges come together, the deeper you put it into the material, the wider it is from one cutting edge to the other. So if I want a slightly finer cut, then I make sure that I don't go quite so deeply into the linoleum. So I'm going to hold it at a different angle. Generally speaking, the higher the angle, it'll set the blade a little deeper in the linoleum. And so I can get a thinner line even or a thicker line depending on how deeply I put the blade. Let me switch. Put a thinner blade in. Make another cut. Okay, now if I wanted to make a curve, again, I'm using this up against the bench block. I curve the block, but you always want to keep your hands behind the direction of the cut. Excuse me. Okay. Now, say that I've completely cut my block and it's time to print. Then I can also use my bench block, and it can now become an inking plate. All right, I can use my inks, spread it out. And whether I'm using the Speedy Cut, the linoleum, whichever. Roll it out. They have different size brayers. If you have a small area to print or a small block, they have small brayers. For a block this size, I'd use a larger one. And you spread that out. You want to spread it out evenly. And once you have the inks evened out on your inking plate, you just want a bit of texture. If it is really high peaked and if it's making kind of a slurpy, sticky sound so people across the room know you're printing, then you have way too much ink. So you want to avoid over inking. And it'll take several applications of the ink to the block to get it evenly covered. You might go in a couple of different directions. You don't use a tremendous amount of pressure. Generally, it's just the weight of the brayer itself to deposit the ink on the block. And then it's time to print. The printing paper for relief blocks is a softer paper. The best paper to use is a mulberry paper. All right. If you use a very hard paper, then it's going to be less absorbent. Put the paper on top of the ink, or the inked up block. I usually kind of pat it down a little bit, a little generous there. Okay. Then I'll take a scrap piece of paper and put on top, because a lot of times when you are printing on the back of the paper, it's going to start pilling or start disrupting the surface of the mulberry paper because it is a softer paper. So it could be just any kind of thin piece of paper that you put on top of it. And then I print with a baron. A baron has a handle on it. It has a flat piece of hard plastic, and then there's this Teflon sheeting that has been stretched over it. Hold on to it. You generally can start seeing the ink coming through. I thought maybe I could kind of get it to start to pill to show you what it looks like when that does happen. So you start to get these little bits of paper that kind of roll up as you go along. And so try to get that to be a little more dramatic here about what happens. But essentially, you're peeling the back of the paper off with the baron. Yeah, there's a little bit more, so I can just kind of... And if you have several different layers of color to put on it, then if you keep on doing it, pretty soon you're going to rip through the paper, and it's not a thing to be done. Right? So wherever you've cut the block out with your cutting tools is below the surface, so as you ink up the surface with the ink, then it's going to stick to everything except for where it's been carved out. So that's pretty much just your basic needs. The most important thing is what you have up in your head and figuring out what images are going to be those that you want to interpret in terms of block printing. But as far as the equipment is concerned, it's pretty simple, pretty direct, and it should be something that everybody has a lot of fun with. So this is Franz Spohn at Nasco using Speedball inks. See you.